Well, George, this is cozy, isn't it?
It really is.
It really is cozier than we were expecting. Welcome, everyone, to episode 8 of the Data Mix. My name is Brian Booden.
And my name is George Beaton.
And we are in the same room together. And you may notice that we are in a different room from when we managed, like a couple of episodes ago now, I think we managed to be in the same room, but in a different place. Yeah. Should we tell the story? I think we should tell the story.
We should briefly tell the story, yes.
Yeah, go on then, you start. What happened this morning?
So I think during the pandemic, I've had access to the WeWork buildings in Edinburgh, which has been great. But for some reason, unbeknown to me, my WeWork card doesn't work anymore. So I'm not sure if we've not been paying the bill or who knows. We'll get to the bottom of it. But in the meantime, Brian to the rescue. We're in a Regus just along the road.
So we tell you no lies when we say we arrived here at something like 2:48.
Yeah.
We scrambled the microphone, which is here. We have the second laptop, which is here. We have the third screen, which is up in this direction. And you can't see any of that. So we've had some... we're very, very happy to be here, though, in the same room.
Great background, though.
I know, we got a quality background there as well. I haven't actually studied what the background is. Princess Street,
I'm looking by these buses. That's... 15 years ago?
It must be, yeah. Well, there's the Royal British Hotel.
Oh, so, and no trams.
Yes.
Yes.
George even edged off camera there to let you see the background that was there anyway. So, how are you, mate, anyway? Apart from our trials and tribulations, it's been a little while. And you picked me up from my house today as well, which was nice.
Yeah. It's nice just to be out and about.
It is. And we are mask-free legally in Scotland now, which is a bit of a change. It's only been for a couple of days as well.
It's been strange because over the last couple of months, I've been backwards and forwards to London on the train. Yeah. And as soon as you get to the border, there's an announcement to say, masks up.
Yeah, you're not in Scotland anymore. You're not in Scotland anymore. So, no, it's been great. I mean, I've been away on holiday for a week or so, and that was beautiful and sunny. It's almost as sunny as it is here.
I haven't.
You haven't been yet?
Not yet.
I haven't been yet. Well,
June.
I'd recommend it. I'd recommend it. It's quite good to get out of the country for a little bit. So this is a really cool experience for us to be live here, and welcome everyone to episode 8 of the Data Mix. Can't even speak. I'm so excited. And what is the reason that we're so excited? Well, apart from this beautiful picture we've got behind us, we've got a cracker of a guest for episode 8. And I think without any more build up or further ado, we're just going to bring him on. Our guest for episode 8 is Donald Farmer, a good friend of ours for a very long time, a fellow Scot. What do you think of our artwork, Donald? Have we impressed you enough?
It's lovely, yeah. It makes me very kind of homesick, I've got to say.
It's Edinburgh pre-trams.
Exactly, yes. Yeah. And not much traffic either. And shops, it's not just all empty.
I know, you forget what it's like at times, don't you? But we are literally right in the middle of it, almost right on top of the building that's in this photo. So anyway, it's great to be here and great to have you here, Donald, as well. How has life been for you during the pandemic? Since it's been a while since we've spoken, and I think we've posted. That it's been so long since I've actually seen you in person as well.
I know it's been a long time. It's a long time since I saw almost anyone. It has been very quiet. I was always traveling a lot on business, and of course that has stopped, so I haven't been seeing people. And of course I'm over here in the US, and the US is a bit different. The whole dynamic here about the pandemic and healthcare has been different, and actually, to be fair, it's actually different in different parts of the US as well. Where I am, I'm in this kind of cozy little suburb of Seattle, and we've all been very carefully masking. And you can go to the next town, which is 8-9 miles away, and they are having, armed protests in the streets against masks. So it's not as if you can say there's one thing, there's one attitude that sums up the experience of the pandemic here. It's actually very different wherever you happen to go. So it's been a bit disconcerting, and it's been very quiet. On the other hand, I've got a lot of work done, and I'm actually one of those people. I don't mean to say I've enjoyed the pandemic, but I'm actually quite a quiet homebody myself, and it's suited
I've met a few people like that recently, Donald.
Yeah.
It's
I think we've all been wondering how the tree hive has been getting along as well, Donald. How's that been? How's that been faring?
Has been doing really well.
Well used, I would imagine.
Yeah. The tree house and the kind of hive-shaped tree house in the big Douglas fir has been great. We had a feral cat moved in for a while. It dominated it. We could hardly use it ourselves because this wild cat was living up there. And now we've had a couple of raccoons that have decided that they want to play on the steps, so we're now having to deal with that. So it's never-ending excitement in the treehouse.
Well, it's great to hear that you're well. Anyway, we're delighted to have you here, and to get to the topic of the day. As much as the pandemic is a burning issue, we've got you here for something completely different, and obviously, well versed in lots of areas of analytics, Donald. But I think one of the areas that we talked about over the last few weeks, when we were sort of preparing for this session, was data and analytics as a line of business, as an area that is really up and coming. And we talked a little bit about it on the pre-call, but do you want to just give just a wee bit of an introduction about what that is as a concept and how we might relate to that as analytics professionals watching the call today?
Yeah, that's I think it's a really interesting topic. We should start by clarifying what we mean by a line of business, actually. I think when we say a line of business, because there's a lot of talk in the analytics space and data management space about data monetization. You hear that phrase a lot. Data monetization. Oh, I can sell my data. But that's not all that we mean when we say there's a line of business. That is possible. But a line of business could be, in particular, building analytics on top of that and making analytics part of your offering to customers, your offering to partners, your offering to clients. So it becomes, if you like, the analytics becomes a component of your overall offering that you make to customers, clients, and partners, and you run it as a line of business, meaning it needs management, it needs marketing, it needs support, it needs design, it needs all of those things that go into running a full line of business. So it's not just, hey, we got some money, because of data, we can make some money out of it. It's much more about, what is that entire process, and what are the benefits of bringing, in particular, not just the data itself, but the analytics on top of it. What can you do with that? And there's a lot of scenarios where people can add analytics to existing software products, but also to existing real-world services, not just software services. So that's what I've been working on. It's what I'm particularly interested in just now.
It sounds like a fascinating topic to dig into, which we are going to any minute now. But I can just see that LinkedIn is on fire there, George. So I wonder if we might just say hello to a few of our LinkedIn audience that are out here. I don't know if you're running at the same time here, Donald, and you can see what's happening. But we've got
I'm just about to. Okay.
We've got Susan Walsh here. Wow, we are in the same room. Yes, Susan, you better believe it.
Hi, Susan.
We came very close to not being in the same room and almost making a decision today, but we talked each other into it. So it's great to be here. I'm really glad that we did as well. And storytelling. Of course, Dalton. It wouldn't be anything different if we weren't storytelling and didn't. We loved it when we came into this room. We had the picture behind us as well. A couple other people we've got in as well. Jenny, obviously a great supporter of the show. Thanks for popping in again, Jenny. Absolutely. It's wonderful to virtually see you. Hopefully we'll again. One of these days, as George says, we may actually have a live audience too. You just never know. I'll let you into a secret. We did propose a session for World before it went virtual, and we'll just never know. But we'd love to do a live audience version of this. It would be great. I don't know what Dalton was responding to, but heck yes, just about sums up everything.
It was a live audience,
I would say as well. I think there's one more thing that came up as well, Donald. Your audio is coming across just a little bit static and dicey. I think we're good and everyone can still hear everything all good. But
okay.
just for your info as well.
There was something strange, wasn't it, on the recall about this? I'm going to try just switching my audio, and you can tell me if that helps.
No problem. No problem.
No, we can't hear you.
We cannot hear you now. So that's not good. So we're going to wait for Donald to come back. And while we're stalling for our star guest to come back, we're going to just dive into this topic a little bit more and set him up a little bit. So, actually, while we're waiting for Donald, we will do one thing. And we have been diligent. We have been setting up our next episode. And I'm not going to tell you who the next person is for the next episode. But what I am going to do is give you a little sneak peek in the corner here. So I don't know if you can see. Let's get my pointing right in that top corner up there. Donald can point at it better than I can. He's closer on the screen. But in the top right-hand corner, we've got a QR code there. And if you scan that, you'll be taken to our next LinkedIn event, which will be episode 9. And you'll find out ahead of time who we're going to be speaking to.
Impressive.
That is pretty impressive. We're always working on technological advances here at the Data Mix. Did we get you back yet, Donald?
Let's see, can you hear me? Oh.
Yes, perfect.
Is it still staticky? It seems a bit strange to me, but because
it sounds better actually. Sounds better, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, Hugo will let us know, no doubt.
So let's just jump right in then, Donald, and just to get us started off, why don't we just talk a little bit about give us a bit of the concept here? How can data and analytics be developed as a line of business to begin with? Give us a bit of the overview of where we start here.
Let me give you an example to start. One of the examples I really like to take is like 2008. The London Stock Exchange was doing, about 0.6 billion pounds of business, so probably about $1 billion of business. The vast majority of which came from trading stocks. That's his job. It's the stock exchange. By 2018, it was doing over 1.5 billion pounds of business, so that's about $1.8 billion, almost $2 billion, and data was the largest single component of that. Data had gone from being a small component of its business to being the largest single component of the business of the London Stock Exchange. And along with that, there was clearing services, which are data-driven services, and trading was now a minority component of its overall economic mix. Now, it still had to do the trading because it's still a stock exchange. So that's still, if you like, its core business. But data and data-driven services were actually driving the majority of its revenue. So that's a very dramatic example of how data actually became the single most valuable component of a business, and that's sort of pretty interesting. So that's one extreme example. Let me give you a less extreme example, which I think is maybe less indicative of, but also more typical if you think of the work that we might be able to do. One of my clients works in the fields of kind of ethics tracking, complaints tracking, HR problems, that sort of thing. They have a software suite which enables people to do the HR departments to track complaints and so on. So let's say you see a spike in complaints, and this literally happened after the Me Too moment happened. The Me Too hashtag came off. So you see a spike in your complaints, and of course lots of people are now reporting past incidents, current incidents that wouldn't do it before. Now, is that good or bad? We might think it's a good thing that people are happy to report it. But how do you now know whether this increase for you is worse than for anyone else? So for example, if your claims have increased 25% and everybody else has increased 50%, you're actually doing okay. But if your claims have increased 25% and everybody else has increased 10%, you're not doing well at all. So what they were able to do was to take data from all the clients that they had, they were a SaaS business, so they could take data from all the clients, anonymize it, aggregate it, serve it back to people as benchmarks, and say, here's a service which enables you to see not just how you're doing internally, but how you're doing compared to other businesses in the same sector, other businesses in the same geography, other businesses of a similar size, even start to benchmark departments against departments. And that's a data-driven service. That's an analytic service, which adds tremendous value to that company's business. And eventually for them, it became a completely separate product that they could license separately, they could sell separately. It became an analytic business in its own right. So that really was a line of business that spun off. So those two examples, the data monetization one, data is a fantastic resource. And in many cases, you can just make data available and, share it out. But in other cases, you want to build analytics on top of that. And then the analytic itself becomes the insight that you can monetize or the insight that you can add to your existing offering. And then you have the, let's say earlier, you have the job of marketing it, you have the job of managing it, supporting it, and so on.
Yeah, sorry, on you go.
Yeah, so I think that's an interesting example where an existing business has used insight that they've got from the type of whatever it is that they're selling or trading. So it's a sort of add-on, an additional revenue stream. Have you also seen a trend, Donald, in companies that are all they're doing is taking data that's already out there in the world and then building a service on top of that data? I have a couple of examples.
I have some I want to ask about as well. So this is a really good question.
Wondering if that's an explosion. I'll give you my example. There is a company called Dataiku that provide a beautiful machine learning platform. I know of one company that is using that platform now to index tools like 4chan and 4chan and various other chat services to understand when the next activist investor crisis is going to happen. And there are now individual stock trading companies buying that service, buying that intel, because somebody was clever enough to actually understand how to go out using somebody else's tool to understand how to index these sites and then sell that intelligence back.
Yeah, that's an extension of the sort of traditional style of data market product that existed. And as you know, at Click, data market, we acquired a data market when I was at Click, and there's a lot of services which aggregate data in some way, or collect data in some way and serve it back, and you can subscribe to it. But it starts to get interesting when somebody, as you say, with the smarts, does the aggregation and adds value to it,
almost opportunistically.
Right, exactly. Adds some insight to it and then serves it back. So yeah, there's definitely places for that. A really interesting example, one that I've been working on over the last 2 years, has been in hospitality, where hotels and restaurants and so on have all had huge problems, as you can imagine, over the course of the pandemic, which means that all the ratings in terms of satisfaction and all the Yelp ratings, all the Expedia ratings, all the Orbitz ratings, all the TripAdvisor ratings from 2 years ago are frankly almost irrelevant now. They no longer really apply. And so this team have been taking that data, aggregating everything over the last 2 years and trying to track which hotels are coming back on track, which ones are doing well out of this, which restaurants are doing well in service, but only doing it over the last 2 years, and creating a kind of a sort of kind of mini score, which is aggregated out of all of these other scores. But they're not giving it to the public; they give it back to the hotels and the restaurants so they can do competitive analysis, in particular, so they can judge when is the best time to come back into the market, open up again, and what are the kind of things they should be doing. Now, that's a very smart piece of aggregation. It takes a lot of understanding of the business. Takes a lot of scraping of data to do that in order to get all these different services. But it's an example of how people can add intelligence to it, not just providing the data, but providing the insight, the vertical industry insight that makes that data come alive for people.
So I think that's fascinating, and here's an interesting question for you that might have just gone out of my head just as I was about to ask it. I hate it when that happens, but how much of this do you think is incidental, Donald? So when you talk about aggregating this data, right, there's two ways to do it. You do it explicitly and you create a service to do it, or you harvest what's out there already, right? And you make the best of what you have, and sometimes you can turn that into a service. So are you seeing a trend towards that happening more explicitly now, and that companies are being much more, they're making it a target? And like you say, as a line of business, that's the key effort here. We're actually putting effort, money, and people into creating these frameworks to be able to aggregate more easily. So where does the line fall? Where's the line falling for businesses at the moment in terms of we'll just see what we can get, and we're going to build a framework that manages this. Where do you see that at the moment?
Well, there's sort of three lines that you have to draw here to use that analogy. And one is that there are businesses who for a long time have been sharing data and making data available and selling data. And the classic examples that I think everybody in this space starts to quote would be Walmart and Tesco in the supermarket space, who sell data back to their suppliers. And of course, there are specialized companies like Nielsen and IRI who do nothing but this, or for whom this is a major business, providing data back to suppliers in order to optimize the supply chain. So we know what's selling best, we know what's selling well, we'll give you that data. And then the suppliers bid for the data, they bid for more detail on the data, they bid to be the category captain and get to see what everybody else is doing, or they lose the bid and they only get to see their own data, things like that. There's a whole system there that makes that work. And that's a classic example of companies who've been very focused on making data available, and they're following that model. And so that's one area that you could kind of demarcate and say there is a real well-established data business. The second area is this space that George is talking about, and you're suggesting that people can find data and start to create a business around it because we've got data. We can aggregate it with other data. We can mash it up, and we can start to create effectively data products that we can sell. And those data products are super interesting. And what's happening there in that space just now is, a lot of people taking public data that's available. There's a lot of publicly available information, and starting to do mashups with it. And then the third space is, well, we've got data and we can start to provide these analytic services that I've been suggesting. So benchmarking being an absolute classic example of how we could provide benchmarking. The one thing that the benchmarking area starts to have problems with is running into GDPR privacy issues. You really have to, and I hope we talk
preempted my question there, Donald. Yeah, and that widens into two separate areas. And first, that is one area that we did want to talk about. So, what is the value of benchmarking in this process, in this context? Is the very first question. But right. I suppose right on the other side, we had Caitlin McDonald on several episodes as well, talking about the ethics of data and how it gets used in the public domain. And again, when you talk about monetization and you talk about aggregation of data and you talk about GDPR, those are all very thorny issues that have to be handled extremely carefully, especially when that data may be accumulated from various parts around the globe and has to traverse between multiple servers to get there. It's not a problem that is new, but it does become more of an issue when you try to repackage and resell that data in terms of GDPR, governance, and all of those things. So I've thrown a lot of things at you there, but first of all, let's go to the benchmarking one first and see where the value of that lies.
Let's take to the benchmarking. So, the example I gave you of the ethics company, benchmarking because you don't know if it's something that's good or bad, that actually is the real value. All analysis, when it comes down to it, is a form of comparison. And if you do kind of sales analysis and you compare yourself internally, that's one way of, tracking your sales. But what if your competitors are doing better than you? It doesn't matter how well you're doing, in a sense, So benchmarking is about that. It's about how to enable an understanding of where you are in the market. Another example of this, one of my about 2019, 2020, I guess it would have been, the winter of 2019, 2020 was a really bad winter in parts of the USA. And one of my clients is a large construction company. They do civil engineering, very, very large scale civil engineering, freeways, subways, underground trains, all this sort of thing. Yeah. And in the very bad winter, they were having accidents on site. It was actually pretty serious. They worry about this for their staff. They worry about the safety. But of course, everybody else is having these accidents as well. And they were able to eventually go in, scrape data from public data sources, because a lot of this is available through, health and safety kind of regulation websites which share this information. And they were able to see that actually their rate of accidents wasn't that bad compared to the overall industry. The training they had done had actually paid off. Yes, they had a spike, but it wasn't as bad as everybody else was seeing. That turned out to be critical information for them because they could have, in a sense, overreacted, or potentially, if their numbers were bad, they could have done the opposite. They could have been complacent and said, "Well, it's a bad winter. Everybody's having accidents," but actually, they might have been in a worse situation. So benchmarking provides that sort of insight into how you are doing in comparison. And if you think about it, every time we do an analysis of anything, we're actually comparing to something. Comparison is a fundamental analytic. So that's the reason benchmarking is actually successful. Any business you can think of, any business, you can find a benchmarking scenario. That's one of the reasons it's a very exciting space to work in, because I can go into any client and find opportunities for benchmarking in their services.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to throw another example. This is a slightly more fun example as well. So some people may know this, and some may not. But I'm a big fantasy basketball fan, right? So I spend a lot of my time scraping box scores on Yahoo and ESPN, and that is one side of things. That's how you get statistically advantageous information to do that kind of thing. But I think what would always fascinate me is if there was a way to understand the people who won their leagues, what they were doing to win their leagues. So the information that you have available to scrape is the stuff that tells you of the general population, right? What does the general population do on a day-to-day basis? But it doesn't tell you what do the top 5% do. How do they make the big bucks at the end of it? Now, ESPN and Fox and Yahoo and all these companies have that absolutely have that information, but they don't make it a public knowledge for very good reason, because otherwise everyone would be winning leagues. But I think that's one of those restrictive barriers that's in there, right? It's about the ownership of the data, what you can get at, and that's where those GDPR lines become a bit of an issue as well. Is that even if you'd imagine if you were in a place where you could pay for a service, almost like pay to win, right? It is. It's pay to win. It's there in video gaming as well. You can pay to win and pay for better stuff. If that became a situation in, for example, I'll stop talking about fantasy sports in a minute, I promise. But if that happened in fantasy sports, you would effectively level the playing field, and the better players wouldn't be the better players anymore, because the market intelligence would be more spread along the ground and available to everyone. So that's the one that, for me, I'd love to be able to develop something like that. And just the last example I've got there as well is LinkedIn. I don't know if people know, but you can actually download all of the data that you have on LinkedIn for yourself. Connections, contacts, all messages, everyone you've ever spoken to, every post you've ever made, but you can only download it for yourself. So again, imagine the market intelligence and the line of business that's available for LinkedIn internally to leverage all of that data to push the right things out to the right people. And again, I appreciate that we're talking about massive amounts of data here, but it is interesting to understand how can the public start to leverage those little projects. And I think that's what we're seeing, Donald, right? Is pockets. We're seeing pockets of people getting into this data.
Yeah. Well, when you talk about fantasy sports, pretty much guarantee if you go on Reddit, you'll probably find there's somebody somewhere doing what you're suggesting. There's probably some pocket of expertise out there where somebody's already cracked this problem. Sorry, George, you were about to.
So I was going to say, but in your example there, Brian, that probably creates or starts to create an arms race of people trying to better each other, which is probably a good thing for humanity. My worry about benchmarking, and maybe your example, Donald, where a company says, "Oh well, our accidents this winter aren't any worse than anybody else's. In fact, they're slightly better," might create some complacency. And therefore, if everybody was just comparing themselves to the worst person, then there isn't really a sort of drive to improve. So there are dangers, I think, with that. And again, it sort of brings into the forefront that what we do with data and down to ethics is quite important, because we do actually have a responsibility here to be ethical with what we're showing.
There's what we can do and what we should do, right?
Yes.
And what the possibilities of what we can do in terms of the discussion topic of today of line of business is expanding the whole time because of the vast array of technology that helps us to tap into that data. but should we do it? It's a very, very good question that I don't think we can necessarily answer on
Well,
this.
there's also this
So
very
I can see
interesting
Donald
distinction.
stroking his chin even more at that question.
Yeah.
So.
Now, there is a very important distinction between what we can do as data people and what we should do as data people, and then what the business do with that information. The benchmarking example that George is giving about people perhaps becoming complacent is a great example, because in a sense that's not a data problem, it's a business use of the data. How does business interpret that and do something with it? And I would think there are really two kind of ethical spheres there. Is it okay to aggregate that data? In that case, it probably is, and share it. And then what did the business do with it? And if the business use it to be complacent, that's a bad use. If they use it to be proactive, it's a good use. And in a sense, there are areas, of course, that the GDPR define. Very importantly, one of the great things that the GDPR does is give people a great deal more control as individuals, as data subjects, over their own data. And we can start to say how we want it to be used. We can start to say what we don't want it to be used for, which is fantastic. But then, of course, business can interpret it in ways that we don't like. They can still do it. It's not that they can't. Let's say we give people permission to analyze for marketing. Businesses could still do different things with that we might not appreciate. The way in which they market, we may be given them permission to use it for marketing, but we didn't think they were going to do that with it. That's another kind of business problem, I was actually talking to somebody the other day who thought that there was a really interesting analytic that they could run in their business about the number of people who opt in and opt out of marketing. So they're actually using the fact that you opt in or opt out of GDPR as an analytic themselves.
Yeah.
Which is, well, opt in or opt out of what GDPR affords you the opportunity to do. And then you could use that, are our number of opt-ins rising or falling? What are the demographics of our opt-ins? What are the geographic kind of spread of people who are opting out? And it turns out there's some really interesting patterns there. But we've got to be super careful. And it's very difficult as data people to know, especially when we start, as you mentioned, Brian, bringing data from different locations, bringing data from different organizations together, because then you can start to have sometimes called the Mosaic effect or triangulation. You can start to get more information out of that than people intended to share. Remember the Netflix prize? The Netflix prize example. This is getting really old now when I talk about Netflix prize, because actually it was back in like 2006 or 2007 or 2008. But Netflix had the recommendation algorithm. Here's the recommended movies for you, and they offered a $1 million prize for anyone who could improve the performance of the algorithm by 10%. And so I was working with the data mining team at SQL Server at that time, so we're all very excited about this. People were doing it in their spare time, and somebody won the prize. Somebody actually won it. So two things interesting about the prize. The way they set it up was they created an anonymized data set. It had proxy ID for the customer. It had the movie watched and the date on which the movie watched, and I think there was some other stuff about genre and maybe director and key actors in there. But it was the user information was completely anonymized. And so the two most fascinating things about the Netflix prize is somebody won and they didn't use the results. We'll talk about that. That's a sideline. And the other one is some Hungarian researchers basically hacked the data set and worked out who the individuals were and could identify the individuals through the anonymized data set. And that was pretty shocking to people at the time, but it actually turned out to be a great example of the Mosaic effect, because the way in which you watch movies, if you've watched some unusual movies I've watched, let's say the Color of Pomegranates, and I watched The Power of the Dog, and which is probably not as a popular one that everybody watches, and I watched an old movie called Hero, which was the first movie that was shown on Channel 4. So I watched these three movies. I might actually be the only person in the world to have watched all three, or I'm certainly the only person in the world to have watched all three in that order on those dates. And then, so you've got that information. I can identify this individual by that fingerprint. And then I can go out onto other social media, like, did anybody comment on these movies on Facebook or on IMDb or on Twitter? And then you can triangulate back and say, oh yeah, that's Donald. That's the guy who did that. Because he's the only person who watched these 3 movies in that order, and he tweeted about them. So now we've identified him. And it turned out to be remarkably easy. A lot of work in those days, but remarkably easy to do that. So you've got to be super careful about this, that you don't enable people to triangulate back to individuals, without intending it to happen. That was that sort of sometimes called mosaic, sometimes called triangulation, but it's a serious problem when you start data available, even if you're anonymizing it.
I think that is a fascinating use case, and I've got another example of that actually, and it's to do with conference. Actually, LinkedIn again, and conferences and signups, and the way you talked about triangulation there, and the way that being able to pinpoint who users are because of the way that they've registered for things, or they've done one action and then another. And again, I have seen instances recently where, for example, someone has registered on Eventbrite, and that has triggered something because they ticked their GDPR button that said, yes, you can use that information. That has triggered an automated post on LinkedIn that says, this person from this company has registered for this event. And then if you're clever enough, you can trace back all the LinkedIn posts to actually trace back and triangulate with what's happening on Eventbrite, with what's happening on meetup.com, with what's happening on LinkedIn, to work out who the person is, what their company are, and negate the need to actually, have a delegate list effectively. You could have 40 or 50% of the delegate list without even really having to work that hard. And that's sort of the disconnected element of data and analytics at the moment that is quite frightening, that there are so many different sources that can happen quite easily. And your Netflix example is a great one, and they really should have used that algorithm, because I believe Netflix just announced that they lost their first annual amount of subscribers over the course of a year, and had something crazy like billions of, was it 50 billion that was
well, they
wiped
lost
off
200,000 subscribers and their stock dropped 30% or something.
Yeah, they blamed
I'm so
Russia
glad I held on to my Blockbuster stock. Its day is coming.
Yeah, but it's interesting then that there's obviously data is a line of business. There are riches to be had, but there are also a lot of pitfalls there as well.
So I'd forgotten when I said the Netflix example, I was going to explain, and Richard Simpson just reminded us, why they didn't use the algorithm improvement. So they got an algorithm which improved the recommendation by 10%. Well, if you go back to around that period in time, think back to what Netflix was like, about half its business at that time wasn't streaming, it was sending off requests and getting discs in the mail. And then that kind of gradually changed to streaming. And the way the algorithm worked was you would actually get a recommendation, the classic, people who watch this also watch that. But the Netflix experience has changed dramatically. Not only is it now all streaming, but it's actually all continuous streaming. You don't watch a program, and increasingly people don't watch and then decide what to watch next. They just Netflix and chill and whatever they do, and then it all just comes to them, and Netflix handles all that for them. So
they've even got a button saying, play me something.
And it's a continuous experience, and that's a different experience from the recommendation that you're going to ask, for something like we recommend and you accept. It's actually just a continuous experience. And think of, if you've just watched the movie that you want to watch. Let's say you've got 5 movies you want to watch. It's Saturday night, you're sitting down with your pizza and beers, you watch the movie which is top of your list. Do you actually want to watch the movie which is second on your list next? Is that really the way you watch? You watch in priority order? That might actually be literally too much of a good thing. By the time it's midnight on Saturday, it's probably time to watch some junk.
So, sorry, Donald, I have to pull you up. When you said Saturday night there, I thought you were going to burst into a chorus of Wigfield. That's the first thing that pinged off in my head. Maybe I'm the only one that gets that reference, but there you go. And what I want to do, actually, the comments is going bananas here, so I just want to pull a few more in here for you, Donald, if that's okay. And we've got one from Dalton here that's just talking about the in healthcare, In the US, there's a lot of organizations that sell data back to other health systems so they can see the context of themselves versus others. So, I mean, this sort of goes back to the ethicality of the situation, if you know. Is it okay for health organizations to reprocess other health organizations' data? And is that being done for the right reasons, or is it being done for marketing reasons or to further their own goals? I guess we'll never know, but it's
what are the right reasons? That's the problem.
true,
What are the right
true.
reasons?
I
And
think
that
in
is one of the
healthcare
things
it's
that I
okay.
like about GDPR, because it puts that control in your hands as a user. You can say, no, don't use my data for this purpose, But what's interesting in the question there was also the suggestion that, what these healthcare companies are doing are actually selling back people's data already. That they're selling data back to the organizations which generated it. It's not that what they're actually doing is adding value and selling it back to you.
But if you take the NHS, for example, I know the NHS anonymizes data around diseases, for example, and then shares that around other NHS boards so that they can get better intelligence onto, how to treat people, what drugs are best, or is there, do people, I did a little bit of analysis for Dumfries and Galloway NHS, and they were looking at hotspots for particular cancers, and they were looking at, is there a correlation on where you live. And the interesting thing about that was anonymized data I was working with.
Yeah.
And if you went back to down to a cluster of 6 or less people in a postcode, then you had to aggregate that with another postcode, because that then allowed you to almost
get right down to
the individual person.
Yeah. And that is advantageous in some ways, but dangerous in others. And I think there's a lot of comments on here. I know we've got people like Jenny and Rob and Dalton and Joe who all work in the field of healthcare and will have opinions on what the right and the wrong way is for this as well. But it is fascinating. What is the right thing, and what is the right way to do things?
Well, I think it is fascinating, and I think it's important to say there's not one answer. But the approach that GDPR have taken of putting the control in the hands of the user, or of the data subject, is actually really important. The fact that I get the chance to decide what happens to my data, and I think we'll see in the data universe a significant shift over the next few years towards us as data subjects having more control over our data, and being able to, in a sense, own our data, and then we'll be able to monetize it back to companies like Facebook. You want to use my data, you have to give me something for it.
And that ties into, again, I just want to pull in Giuseppe's comment from slightly earlier as well. Thank you guys so much for all the comments, by the way. We're loving all this interaction in the chat as well.
Awesome.
Again, streaming services, we've talked about it from the Netflix angle, but again, you think about massive companies like Spotify, Apple, all looking at the same type of technology. And again, think about what happens when you say to Alexa, play me some music, right? Having the intelligence to be able to say, to just continue to play you the right type of music based on your history. And that all happens not just because of the aggregation of your own data, right? But the aggregation of people like you and what you might like when you turn 2 years older and all of that side of things as well. So it's
I think that's fascinating. The idea of a music service being able to kind of analyze the music and then go back to the artist and say, more cowbell or whatever would be fascinating.
Yeah. But I mean, ultimately, I just for the for humanity's sake as well, the one that really interests me is sharing. I'm not going to say monetizing, but the same principle, sharing healthcare data, because I think as processing power gets better, as artificial intelligence gets better, as we're going to our doctors more, but we're finding our doctors are having difficulty or GPs are having difficulty in prescribing the right drugs or understanding what our condition is.
Yep.
Being able to share other data, if I've got a problem with my vision, for example, then asking a doctor for an answer right there and then might be difficult. But if a doctor that can then pull on thousands of people with my blood type, experience, where I live, all that kind of information could help them get to an answer quicker.
Yeah, that's very true. And we're talking about real life. And again, we've covered this in various topics in the past before, but we're not talking about just monetary gain here, right? We're talking about people's lives. We're talking about health. We're talking about quality of life. all of those types of things, and that's when it becomes real. When you talk about this type of this
But
type
it's the
of
same
Yeah, I
underlying
mean,
technology.
direct monetization isn't the most interesting scenario. Direct monetization is a pretty crude scenario. When you start to add value and integrate and bring data from other sources, that's where it starts to get, really starts to come alive for me personally.
So that dovetails quite nicely into another topic that we wanted to touch on as well. So we've kind of not been strategic in our conversation so far, and we've deliberately covered a lot of topics. But how can we be more strategic about this angle, Donald? If we decide that as a business, yes, this a line of the data as a service and as a line of business is something that we got to want to be involved in. How do we think about that more strategically if that's something that we want to go down?
I'm reading the question, and how can we be strategically more agile when implementing this? But the answer to that is, how can we be strategically more agile when implementing anything? It's not just this. In a sense, this doesn't have any particular strategic roadblock to it. There are some concerns about governance or things that you might need to get over. But one of the barriers to people doing new things with strategy, and this would be by definition a new line of business, if you like, is the unwillingness to experiment. And that's a strategic barrier. If you're willing to experiment, if you're willing to try it, if you're willing to A/B test when you're doing it, then you'll have the agility to spin this up and make it work, or stop the project if it's not working. But it's really important that you have that sort of urge to experiment, and you cannot. I mean, I absolutely guarantee you cannot set this up in advance in a way that success is guaranteed. There are just too many variables, ranging from whether people will be willing to pay for the information, whether it will prove valuable enough over the long term, whether you're going to run into some of these difficulties of, say, ethics or the legislation of data sharing. There's just a whole lot of stuff there. So you have to be able to approach it with a very experimental mindset and say, this is something we're going to try. But actually, strategically, that's the secret to agility anyway, being willing to experiment.
I mean, I think if you take it back to a very sort of pragmatic level, I mean, this could be applicable in very, very straight-laced scenarios in analytics, like just something as simple as managed analytics, where you are a provider that provides many customers, and you just re-aggregate the data internally to give yourself some of those metrics, and it's not even something that it's like having that experimentation to understand whether it's worth having a line of business, isn't it? So there's several steps involved here. It's not just a case of we're going to make this a line of business and let's push the switch. We have to understand what the value is, what the chain is to get to that value, and if it's something that we can sell at the end of the day. Because
it has to be market tested.
Ultimately, we as individuals may be having this conversation saying that's a brilliant product. I want to build fantasy sports algorithms, which I think someone else mentioned in the chat as well. But is it something that's going to be useful to the general public or your client base? And I think that is always that benchmarking. There's that word again, understanding, having been able to put that finger in the water and say, is it something, a product that my customers want? So.
But I like what some of the utility companies are doing, gas and electricity and water companies, when they provide, little kind of analytics of how your usage compares to other people in your area. Do you get that? Do you get that in Scotland now? We get it all the time.
I haven't seen that, but
No?
I like that. I like that.
Yeah, so I get this is how you compare to other people within 100 houses round about you, within your neighborhood, and how does your usage compare? And of course, I always have more questions. What I actually want is, admittedly, the aggregated, anonymized raw data, so I can do more analysis of it. But it's super interesting, and people start to kind of gamify. Oh, I want to be the most efficient in my neighborhood or whatever.
And I think that's something that we're seeing prevalent in services like Money Supermarket and Go Compare. It's not just a straight comparison of cost now. I think that is the next added element that you talk about there is what is happening for my demographic, whether that demographic is age or location or how long you've been with that provider. And undoubtedly all that information is there. It's just whether those businesses want to propagate that to us as the public, and do they want to fold that into their pricing and their commission structures in a way that okay, we'll reveal this information, but subliminally we'll charge you even more than the triple rate
Exactly.
of gas that you're getting charged for at the moment. I don't know what the gas prices are like in the US, Donald, but I basically can't eat anymore if I want to keep my house going. It's not a good situation in terms of the electric
It's a
and gas
little different
costs.
here, of
So,
course, because we have our own sort of natural gas, and the energy market in the US is crazy. So it's in some ways it has very serious dysfunctions. So people complain here primarily about the price of petrol at the pump. Electricity and heating and things like that tend to be on a much slower cycle, if you like. But yeah, it's a mess. It's a mess everywhere.
I think I've just seen a really interesting question. I don't know if you've seen that. It just popped into the chat right at the end there, George. That I think we'll bring up here. I think it's we can see from LinkedIn who this is, but we'll not for some reason sometimes it doesn't come through in Restream. But let's talk about Google. Let's talk about when we're talking about aggregation and we're talking about lines of business for data. Google are the ultimate, or could be the ultimate at this, but one would argue that they have a monopoly on all kinds of data, that some which we know, some that we know, and some things that we don't know. So do you see a shift in the types of things that this size of organization, like these kind of global monopolies, if you like, and them using this type of analytic to persuade, I guess, people to use other parts of their services, I guess, would be the main use case there.
Well, I would say there's kind of three parts to this question. There's, are Google a monopoly? Do they? Do we want to regulate the monopolization? In other words, which would mean that we would want other companies to be able to do the same thing. So Google didn't have a monopoly. So if there's lots of companies managing your data, is that better? I'm not sure that's the intention behind the question, but you could read it that way. In other words, do we want other companies? Is the problem that Google has a monopoly and other people should be able to do this? I am not happy with that. I think the idea that, can we regulate Google in a different way? I think, again, GDPR has made some progress towards that, and I think you'll start to see people having much more control over their data. But the third thing is transparency about, do you even know, and this is inherent in the conversation we've been having, they do a lot of things we don't even know about. And even when you check that little box and you say, yes, I give you permission to do that, you don't know what the implications of that are. You have no idea what they're going to go off and do with it, really. And so I think the key to all of this is not the regulation first, but the transparency first. They should be required to tell people very clear, plain language terms, this is what we are doing with your data. And when they do something with it, they should be telling you, we did this because we had your data. We're serving you this advert because of these reasons. And I think that transparency would make it much clearer to people what's going on, because the vast majority of people have no idea what's happening with their data, even when they check the box saying they're giving permission. They don't even know what happens when they check the box that says, I don't give you permission.
Yeah.
They don't even understand what happens in that case.
And that's even before we talk about the overall tick box that we all tick when we sign up to a LinkedIn or a Facebook, and then before you know it, Facebook is showing you adverts based on lines of business that you've been discussing with your good friend Donald online because it's been listening in the background. And now I've noticed that phones as well have now started doing a little voice activation notification to let you know I know that I'm still awake because I can hear your voice. So your phone is now starting to tell you that
That
it can
seems
hear your
very
voice.
Cartesian.
I don't know what to make of all of that, but it had, like you say, it has interesting implications in terms of we don't know what we tick, do we? Really? I mean,
No,
we
we really
really
don't.
don't.
Yeah. I think for me, the power is not with us at the moment, and somehow the user needs to be. I think there needs to be some innovation that makes it easy for the user to take back control of their data, and if nothing else, at least be paid somehow. I mean, at the moment, Instagram's great for scrolling through, but you know that you're the commodity there. What you click on, what you like, is now being sold back to other people.
Yeah.
So there's nothing for free. That's
and Angel makes a great point in the chat as well, that the problem is that they don't even know what they're going to do with the data yet.
Right,
so when
exactly.
you tick that box, the box is a catch-all that says we don't know what we're going to do with your data yet, but we'll tell you the next time you have to tick the box. And I think that's a valid point as well. I think that, just to frame this conversation, though, I think that we are dealing with very large organizations here, and I think that the key here that we're talking about is what's the value that in the businesses that you and I work in, and Donald possibly as well. What's the value that we can get out of that? And just with about 5 minutes left on the call, I'd just like to get some final closing comments from you, Donald, about that in terms of the overall value that lines of business and data as a line of business can add. Well, what would be your top 3 takeaways at this point?
Well, so the biggest takeaway is that there is a tremendous amount of value locked up in data. If you can unlock that with analytics and share that, sharing the analytics, sharing the insight is really where the value comes out. So that's one thing. The second part of it is that you still have to have your core business. London Stock Exchange still trades stocks. This is an additional value. It's always a value add. It's not a new thing in its own right. And the third thing that we've discussed a lot is we have to be super critical about the ethics here. We have to be very aware of the ethics. People are not, in these big organizations, and I've worked in many of these big organizations. I know people who work in them, and they're not evil people. They're not doing this because they're badly motivated or anything. They're doing it because they can, and they're doing it because their motivations are, well, I get more bonus if engagement with my product increases. So we have to change the alignment of these businesses, the mega businesses, their economic alignment. If we change that, and we can do that through regulation, we can do that through public pressure, then this process changes a little bit more naturally rather than imposing regulation.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose just drawing full circle on that, this is quite a paradigm shift for you, Donald. Just to go back to the olden days, just for a minute, of Microsoft and Click and building physical software to solve physical data issues. I bet did you ever think that you would be in this area considering what you knew back then? Did you ever foresee these types of problems or think that you'd be solving these types of problems on an everyday basis?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the very first projects I worked in Microsoft back in 2001 was looking at how we could provide aggregated insights for very small businesses who didn't have enough data themselves. We were building analysis services, we were doing data mining, all of which were meant to be focused on large enterprises. How do smaller businesses get that benefit? Well, they don't have enough business, but so could we anonymously aggregate the data? And that was an experimental project we ran back in 2002, 2003. So it has been part of what I've been thinking about for a long time, actually.
Interesting. Yeah, because I think there's an opportunity there for small businesses actually to like a data exchange for small businesses to be able to sell. Who comes into their shop, who buys their coffee, because that would be useful for somebody else maybe wanting to set up a business in the same time, but it'd be really difficult to get.
Yes, yeah. It's the framework and the regulation around it. It's always going to be that, isn't it? Yeah. How do you set that up in a safe space where everyone can access it and do the things that they want to do with it, and stay on the. There is another, but this man is all about the business opportunity. Let me tell you. Well, look, I hate to say this, but we're actually drawing up onto the hour now. Can you believe that? It's absolutely blitzed.
I thought we just started.
Well, yeah. Saved by the bell, Donald. Maybe we're saying that as well. But, I mean, this has been an absolutely tremendous discussion. I think we've been in so many areas, and it's been enlightening to talk about some of these different avenues that maybe we don't appreciate on the day-to-day basis. And I think one of the things that we love doing about the data mix is that it does make us stop and sit back and go, oh, right, so there are implications of that. And it lives quite long in the memory when we finish the shows. So thank you so much for that, Donald. It was wonderful to have you on. We look forward to having maybe a proper pint with you the next time that you're back in Scotland. So please do just drop us a line whenever that might happen in the future. But
thanks to the great audience as well.
Thanks to the great audience. The comments were absolutely on fire there. We've loved having you all on as well. And I do have to make a sort of final reference as well. We've had our QR code sitting in the top right-hand corner now. Again, I've got my pointing thing all wrong, Donald. It's not good at all. But we've had our QR code for episode 9 in the top right-hand corner. So I think I'm not sure how gracefully I'm going to do this, but I'm going to try and do it anyway. If I try and add something in the background here, let's just see if I can get this up. Let's see if I can get a window up here and look at here. Oh, I don't know if I can. So I'm just gonna go for it. I'm gonna pop us off screen for a second. There's going to be a bit of a drum roll, and then I'm going to pop us off screen for a second, and we're going to see who's here for episode 9. Might all go quiet while we let it happen, but I'm going to do it anyway. So in 3, 2, 1. We'll bring everyone back now, and we'll turn that off and come back there. So if you caught that was Susan Walsh, the classification guru, as our next guest. And I've got to say, I'm so excited about this because why am I excited about this, George? Apart from the fact that it's Susan, why am I excited about this?
Because we're all three going to be in the same room.
All three of us are going to be in the same room, but like all of us, maybe in this room, maybe in this room again. But we haven't decided whether Susan's going to sit here or that side, but we are already in planning for this as well. It's going to be epic. Our first ever 3-person Data Mix live in the same room. I'm excited, George.
We're just one step away from a live audience.
One step away from a live audience. ClickWorld needs to roll round again and get us in the right position to do that. But Donald, thank you once again. It's always a pleasure to have you on. Any closing thoughts from you? We've loved having you here. So
it's just been great. I look forward to seeing everybody in person at some point over the course of the next year as we all start catching up. I've missed everyone, especially in the Click ecosystem. It's been too long. But thanks very much. It's been a great pleasure. Fantastic. So again, all that remains to do is to say thank you to Donald again, our wonderful audience on LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, all of the metaverse that lives out there. Any final words, George?
Just a big thank you to you, Donald, and to the audience. Been great interaction on the comments today. Fantastic.
Well, that's it for us. Don't forget to scan the QR code and join us for episode 9. I've forgotten the date, but it's all there if you go there. And we will see you in a few weeks' time. Thank you very much, everyone. See you soon. Cheers.
Bye.